What do you think of when you hear the phrase toxic masculinity? Do you feel angry, defensive? Do you nod your conviction? Do you squirm in your seat? When I first started thinking about this phrase, here's what I thought. Toxic? That's another word for poison. Listen, I'm no angel, but I'm not toxic. I'm not poisonous. That's not me. For many boys in America, it seems extreme. We believe ourselves to be more subtle than that, and often we are. But something hard to see is still there. In January of 2020, The Atlantic magazine published an article called The Miseducation of the American Boy, an excerpt from a book by Peggy Orenstein. And it talks about young men in America. It's an excellent article, but it tells a story of a frightening kind of cliched masculinity. Boys my age and younger that throw around homophobic slurs, hunt for sexual conquest, and slander their female peers behind their backs. For many boys that the author interviews, the life of a bro, the life of someone masculine, means that women are bitches and sluts. Only pansies cry, and rape can always make a funny joke. It's shocking, right? That was my take when I read it. I didn't talk like that. I wasn't emotionally cut off. My friends didn't make those jokes. I didn't use slurs. I was different. But then I started noticing subtle things that I hadn't before. Last fall, my cousin, who's the same age as me, and his girlfriend broke up. Nathan, as I'll call him here, was devastated. He was shocked. The next day, when we met to talk, he sat hunched in the passenger seat of the car. His eyes were still puffy. Before I could say anything, he straightened suddenly, clenched his jaw, and blurted, "She's just a piece of shit, huh? The whole thing just pisses me off, but whatever." When I asked him what had happened, he recalled their conversation angrily. "This bitch just calls me up and bam, it's over. She's ungrateful. I'm so angry." But his tone did not match the story. She hadn't slammed a door in his face or insulted him. She was unhappy with his anger and disrespect towards her. In his rage, Nathan couldn't or wouldn't or didn't know how to say what he really felt. Pain and hurt and shame, that terrible human feeling that we aren't good enough for those we love. And there was no resolution. Not to their breakup, not to our conversation. In the end, Nathan shrugged and said, "It's fine, just the usual shit." We bumped fists and parted ways. And in that moment, an unspoken door slammed shut between us. A door that keeps many men apart, at arm's length, uneasy allies instead of close friends. Anger is safe for boys in our society. It's easy. When you're lonely or scared or confused or sad, you're weak. But if you can just funnel it into rage, you'll be strong. You'll be in control. You'll be a man. Nathan fell victim to this cruel cycle. He slammed that door. But for me, I felt exempt from all of it. After all, I never considered myself an angry person. But as I said in the beginning, masculine ideals can be subtle, and no boys are immune. In the lead up to middle school, I was called a pussy because I still used training wheels in kindergarten. An older boy told me that because I was placed in the high-pitched singing voice section of the choir as a fifth grader, I was gay. So by the time I got to 7th grade, I felt I had something to prove to the world. The world for me was other boys. I thought I could prove myself on the wrestling mat, so I joined the team. And at first, I got that respect in wrestling. Guys twice my size. I was much smaller then. Guys twice my size treated me as an equal. In the locker room, during warm-ups before practice, I was an athlete. Well, at least in the abstract. I was terrible on the mat. I had a losing streak like no other, which is just a fancy way of saying I hadn't won a single match. Once that became clear, I was vulture food. But I don't mean in these obvious ways. I wasn't beat up or cornered. Nobody threw food at me or called me names. No, it was more subtle than that, more insidious. A sly glance from a bigger boy, a muffled laugh, all told me with crystal clarity I wasn't a man worth my salt. One day, it all came crashing down. My girlfriend had broken up with me. My wrestling skills hadn't improved. I just felt hopeless. Before practice, I walked into my PE teacher's office, sat down on the floor, and cried. Before the teacher, Mr. Crockett, could say anything, both of my wrestling coaches came in. Strong, confident men in their 30s. They strolled in and saw me, a broomstick, draped in a loose singlet with neon orange socks, sobbing on the floor before them. They glanced at me, looked at each other, and one quickly said, "Someday you'll look back on this and laugh." The other quickly replied with, "Look, girls are dumb. Don't worry about them." They told me to keep my chin up and hit the mat. They laughed. When they walked out, I got up and wiped my nose. I mean, they were right, weren't they? I was being stupid, fretting about some girl, being a wuss instead of actually improving my wrestling skills. But before I could walk out, I felt a tap on the shoulder. It was my PE teacher, Mr. Crockett, who was still sitting in his chair. He looked at me and said calmly, "Reece, I know you cared about your girlfriend, and I know wrestling has been hard. I know that kind of hurt feels terrible. I've been there too. I'm so sorry you're feeling this way." And he gave me a hug. Even now, it's hard to put in words what his kindness meant that day. He modeled a behavior that I'll never forget, a kind of vulnerability that our society discourages in boys and punishes in men. In that moment, Mr. Crockett opened a door between us. And I know what you're thinking. How cruel of those coaches. But it's not that simple. They were trying in their way to lighten things and make the moment better. That's what they learned. They were taught, like my cousin, to buck up, to shrug it off. All of these people, my coaches, my cousin, my friends, are good people with good intentions, but they grew up stifled by the spoken and unspoken pressures to be strong and stoic, to conquer and win, and to never, ever let them see you cry. I assumed that through age, people just grew out of this. As time went on, we shed these behaviors, but that's not true. My grandfather is an example of this. A few years ago, my grandmother lost her elderly sister to cancer. My grandmother was devastated, but my grandfather did not know how to comfort her. During one of their visits for dinner, she began crying. My grandfather sighed and said impatiently, "These things happen. Everybody dies, Lois." As if those words were meant to comfort her, to heal her. I read the room. I quickly leaned over to my grandfather and whispered, "Granddad, I don't think that's really helping Grammy right now." He snapped. "Well, it helps me." Stoicism was the air he breathed, and anger was the only exception, coming out like pressurized bursts of rage. At a lid he can't unscrew, a pencil he can't grip, or a word he cannot draw from memory. I should tell you another truth, though. My grandfather's a good man. He's thoughtful and kind and witty. At 93, he still cracks jokes that make me laugh until I'm gasping. But he spent his life abiding by a certain set of norms. Avoid, deflect, toughen. If you can't push through, you're not trying hard enough. Standards like his are not only bad for society as a whole, they are damaging to boys and men. By succumbing to these pressures, we abandon so many parts of our humanness. our love as much as our strength, our compassion as much as our bravery. And women are forced to pick up the slack, shouldering the burdens of emotionally stunted men. In many ways, I got lucky. My dad is my hero. He models love. When I'm upset, he sits me down in the den and says, "Now tell me how you're feeling. How can I help you? I'm here for you." My friends and I are trying every day, deliberately, to notice damaging language and reverse it. But so often does my bubble feel like an outlier. As time goes on, I hear more and more of that language I read in that Atlantic magazine article. I watch my friends who are barely adults solidify piece by piece into stoic shells. Maybe they won't call women bitches or expressive men pansies, but they might become like my grandfather, who will take his stiff upper lip with him to his grave. So how do we fix this? How do we change this? What can we do to move forward? I have some bad news. I'm a teenager. I don't have all the answers. I don't even have one answer. But from what I've seen, the seeds of harmful masculine traits are planted in boys at a young age. Slowly, subtly, and insidiously, these seeds grow, and boys and men suffer as a result. Instead, I suggest we think carefully about what it means to be a resilient man. I don't think a resilient man is cold and stoic. I don't think he's a conqueror of women or sports competitions, colleagues or financial deals. I don't think he angers easily, puts down others, or throws his weight around. To me, a resilient man accepts and embraces that he is human. He feels love and sorrow and joy and everything in between. And when he feels these things, he says so. And importantly, vitally, instead of shutting doors between him and other men, he opens them. And if indeed we learn these cliched, stunting forms of masculinity, then we can certainly unlearn them as individuals and as a society. In classrooms, dinner tables, sports arenas, public offices, and beyond, we can redefine what it means to be a man. So let's stop calling it toxic masculinity, a phrase that makes it too easy for boys and men to say, "That's not me," as I did. Instead, call it whatever you like. Harmful behavior standards, damaging social norms. My point is, it cannot be about the phrase. It cannot be about the label. It has to be about seeing it in and around you, noticing its subtlety, even if you have to squint. Watching how these behaviors strangle emotion, suppress expression, and rob you of your humanness. Accept that no boys are immune. After that is when we can do better. We can show our sons, grandsons, brothers, partners, students, and athletes what resilience really looks like. You can reach a point where another boy can come to you and say, "I'm hurt." And without missing a beat, you'll know what to say in return. "I know, and I'm here for you." In other words, be the man who opens that door. Thank you.